Welcome to the July 18th meeting of the Mobile City Planning Commission. I would like to take a moment to review our general operating procedures. Our meeting is divided into two sessions, the public hearing session and the deliberation session. In the public hearing session, an application or group application on the agenda is called. The applicant makes his or her presentation. Commission members ask questions, if any. Members of the public make their comments. Only 4 people may speak for an agenda item, project, and 4 against. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes, subject to questions by the commission. After 4 minutes, a loud beep will indicate 1 minute left to speak, and at this point, please summarize your comments. After all opposition speakers have finished, the applicant will be given time to respond. If you do intend to speak, please come to the podium, speak into the microphone, and give your name and address for our minutes. Please direct all comments to the commission only and not to the applicant or the audience, and please remember to speak directly into the microphone. On routine applications, the applicant may simply raise his or her hand if there are no objections to the staff recommendations. I will then announce that the applicant is in full agreement with these recommendations. If there are any questions, the applicant will be given an opportunity to respond. After hearing all applications, the commission will go into deliberation session. In the deliberation session, the commissioners discuss each application with input from the staff as necessary, but with no input from the audience. The commissioners then vote on each application, and the results of voting can be learned from the planning department. If some issue arises in the deliberation session that were not addressed in the public hearing, the chairman has the discretion either to allow additional comments pertaining to those issues in order to resolve them, or call for the application to be held over for discussion at a future meeting. Occasionally, one or more commission members may recuse themselves from discussing and voting on a given application. A recusal does not necessarily mean the member is directly involved with the application or the applicant. Depending upon the circumstances, ethical rules may require a recusal when there is only the slightest appearance of a conflict of interest. If a regular member recuses, a supernumerary will vote in their stead unless both supernumeraries are already voting due to absences. The Planning Commission makes final decisions subject to appeal on subdivisions, planning approvals, plan unit developments, PUDs. The Planning Commission only makes recommendations on zoning applications, with the City Council making the final decision. Please silence all cell phones at this time. Commissioners and staff, please remember to turn on your microphones when speaking. Roll call. Myself present. Ms. Libby Latham. Here. Mr. Cart Blackwell.
Here.
Mr. Taylor Atchison.
Here.
Mr. Matt Anderson.
Here.
Ms. Bess Rich.
Here.
Mr. Don Embry.
Here.
Mr. Jay Stubbs.
Here.
We have a quorum. We'll start with item number 1 on our agenda for our holdovers, 2754 Dolphin Street, zoning, Philip Curtin. It's recommended for approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Yes. Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 2 was withdrawn, 2407 Old Shell Road. Item number 3, North Side Government Street, Griffith Subdivision.
Mr. Chairman, only the plan unit development was withdrawn for item 2. They're still requesting the rezoning.
All right. Let's back up to item number 2, 2407 Old Shell Road, Lafayette Land Acquisitions and Zoning. It's recommended for approval. Is the applicant present? All right, in agreement with staff recommendation. Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 3, Griffith Subdivision Addition, north side of Government Street, recommended for tentative approval.
Chairman,
Oh. Okay. All right. You can stay down.
Just
We're on
clarification, I'm sorry, Brett, you're in agreement with number 2, right?
No, he's not on the number 2.
On 3. He thought we were done with 2.
Oh, I see, okay,
So you need to see if the applicant on 2 is.
okay.
Is the applicant on 2 present? Is there anyone here to speak for or against item number 2? Thank you. Item number 3. Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for item number 3, the Griffith subdivision? Anyone here to speak against?
Hi, my name is Brenda Bolton. I live on West Street in Flo Claire. I don't know if you can characterize my comments as speaking against, but I am here to speak for Old Dolphin Way's board, as well as adjacent neighbors, the Champions, and John and Julie Vitalo. The Vitalos are in New York on business and were not able to be here. They asked me to be sure that you had their letter, which was submitted in May. I believe I have one copy of it, but it should be in the file. And in that letter, they have asked that the zoning be B1 rather than B2. They own the home on the corner of Georgia and Government, as well as a vacant lot on the west corner of Georgia and Government. And their lot is B1, and the lot that the old Ginelli's restaurant building is on is B1, and then the easternmost of the Griffiths lots is B1. So that's a nice lineup of B1 lots heading toward residential areas to the east, and the Vitalos have asked that that B1 be retained. Old Dolphin Way's position has also been asking that the zoning be B1 rather than B2. I'll remind you that when I spoke with you in June, we had met with the Griffiths, which they initiated, and we had worked on a list of exclusions with them. I had emailed that list to you, and I gave it to the Griffiths. At that time, they had said that they would pass it on to their representative, and the exact words were, "We'll do the best we can to incorporate that," but we see when their revised application was posted to the website that nothing was expanded in terms of exclusions from the June meeting. Therefore, the compromise that we had hoped for didn't materialize, and as a result, most of the people I've been working with, which in all honesty has not been that great a number of individual residents. I've worked mostly with the Old Dolphin Way board. They're a member of the Government Street Collaborative. And what we kind of do is form sort of ad hoc committees. As an issue arises, we work with whichever district it most impacts. In this case, that's Old Dolphin Way. And so other than the immediately surrounding neighbors and the Old Dolphin Way board, I have not worked with anybody who is really in favor of zoning this amount of property B2 in that location. Now, last time we had I guess it was a misunderstanding on my part, in which I left thinking that the 3 parcels in question would have to be B2 in order to avoid split zoning. But when I got home and really studied the plat and the information online, I'm here to stand, be corrected, planners, but that does not appear to be the case to me. What has to happen is that any zoning has to apply to all three of the parcels in question. But that zoning does not have to be a full B2. Is that correct?
The properties as proposed would be split zoning. It just needs to be one consistent zoning
The three parcels in question all have to be the same zoning?
to create a single lot.
Yes.
Ma'am.
Okay, and that zoning does not have to be B2? That's correct, okay. So in light of that, Old Dolphin Way's board has asked that we return to the idea of a limited B2 zoning, or the preference for many of them is to maintain a B1 zoning there. Personally, I would be willing to go with a B2 with the exclusions that they've offered, with a few more added. So that's sort of our position, and I hope you'll see fit to help us with that compromise. Thank you.
Ms. Bolden,
Yes.
what are you mentioned some additional exclusions you'd like to see added if B2 was granted. Just curious, what are you?
Okay, I have that. And also, while I'm looking for it, I'll say that last time, one of the commissioners said, okay, well, if you don't want these things, what do you want? And I didn't have a ready answer, so I gave some thought to that in the interim. And the things that I think would be acceptable to neighbors are things that involve the typical kind of B1 businesses, you know, office-related, supply, home and personal service-related, work week type businesses, and then the lower intensity businesses that LB2 would allow. The only thing in LB2 that people have really said they would want to fight would be a drive-through, a fast food drive-through. So we would definitely want that added to the exclusions. But the exclusions that we submitted last time and to the Griffiths included drive-through restaurants, day labor contractors, alternative financial institutions like payday lenders and pawn shops, check exchanges, bail bondsmen, and then a dance hall, which is in that category, and homeless shelters with the exclusion of those that serve, you know, like abused women and children. So those are the things we asked to be added, and I have those in writing. I thought it might still be in your folder from last time, so I'll just give it to Mr. Hoffman, and during your deliberations, if you want it in writing, he can provide that.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
No, more of staff, but on the voluntary use restrictions, that has to come from the applicant, correct? It's not like this commission can add.
That's correct, yes, ma'am. And I will read the uses that were specifically listed as prohibited. Adult entertainment enterprise, amusement game arcade, amusement game machine as an accessory use, pawn shop, pool hall, pool tables as an accessory use, shooting range indoor, and teen club.
And that's a good list, and they did add that after we met with them the first time, which we very much appreciated. I think if you had to pick one thing or two things that we would add to that, it would be alternative financial type businesses and drive-through fast food restaurants. And you're right, Ms.
Yeah.
Rich, it does have to be voluntary from the
Correct.
property owner.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all.
Anyone else here to speak against? Does the applicant wish to speak?
Brett Orrell with Poly Surveying for the applicant. I know we've been through this maybe 3 or 4 meetings. Just kind of oversight of this again. You know, we're combining these properties to be one lot. The majority of this property is B2 that's located next to the Griffiths gas station. The small piece that is B1 we're looking to incorporate that in and have that become B2. I stated in the last meeting, we have 2 additional properties that are B1 that buffer any residential corridor to the east. I feel that's substantial. Normally there's 1. If you look at most zoning maps, there's at least 1 property of B1 that transitions. We have 2 in this case. The majority of property to the west is B2. That's what we're seeking. We've done what you asked. You asked us to come up with, get the signed voluntary restrictions per the last meeting. We've done that. We've submitted that to staff. I was tasked to prepare a letter from the adjacent owner to remove the condition done on a previous plat done in the 80s, I believe, or 90s. We did prepare that. Since then, in the last 48 hours, city's legal staff has amended that. We are in the process of getting that worked out with the homeowner. So as part, that is one of the conditions in your approval. So that would be resolved prior to any signing of a final plat. And we're here seeking B2 as presented and submitted as with the voluntary use restrictions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
That's okay. The applicant has already said pawn shops, but maybe that would still, and I'm not sure, so staff can help me with this, but does that still allow loan and things along that? It's not all linked under one. So that's pretty close already when you're saying you don't want the pawn or the title or whatever. So would there be an interest, do you think, from the developer to, or the owner rather, to add that to the list voluntarily?
I'm trying to follow
can you
what
speak for
you're,
them?
Well, I mean,
it's already,
possibly.
you've got pawn shops and
other
other
just
banking.
to let you know where this list was, I personally went through the B2
Right.
as it's verbatim written.
Well, you're pretty close because she's
And-
got 2 that was recommended by the nearby neighbors, and that was those different type of banking programs, which pawn shops fall
I personally
in.
didn't see that in the B2. It's very difficult to get through the Municode to see, but I personally didn't see anything. We were looking at taking the bad uses of B2,
Right,
let's
I
just say,
understand
and
that.
throw them out. I'm not, and if someone can point that out to me and
Yeah, well, that's
explain
why
what
I
it
asked
is,
this
I'll
step.
gladly, discuss that with the owner, but I didn't personally see it, and I'm not
Okay.
really sure on what you're
I
asking
understand.
me.
The other thing is the drive-through restaurant. That seemed to be also something that the residents, they might not mind a restaurant per se, but they didn't want the drive-through. So was there a thought on that?
I don't think that was a consideration as part of that. I mean,
Consideration?
on our part, to limit ourselves on
Oh,
on
so
that.
you would like to
That's a pretty
leave
big
that.
limitation to ask someone for a substantial frontage on government. So I can't foresee the client wanting to limit themselves on that in particular.
Do we have the actual voluntary use restriction form? Has it been
We-
submitted to staff?
It has been submitted via email. I don't think we have the original, but the email has been signed and notarized, and I was reading verbatim to
That's
the
what you were
commission.
reading. Okay.
Yes.
Brett, the rest of the items seem kind of like they may agree to them. The drive-through is probably the sticking point. If the owner is wanting to have that ability, could you tell us how that would be designed on your plat that you've given us?
Well, it's not on what's proposed now. So in terms of my visitation to the site and the maybe traffic can speak to this a little bit more clearly. I'm not an engineer. I don't understand traffic flows in a development for a drive-through. Personally, not done many of those. There's already existing curb cut there that we have proposed to expand upon. That would have to be coordinated with the state. Is that correct, Mary Beth? And there are also large heritage trees that we've shown on site that would be affected should there be a secondary access point. So that would have to come up with tree review as part of the permitting process should something additionally be presented. So in terms of configuration, I think it's coordination possibly with traffic and the state, I believe, on access management. If Mary Beth could kind of speak to that directly.
I can't speak exactly for ALDOT, but understanding where they're coming from with their access management manual, they would not allow a second curb cut, and that's usually desirable with a drive-through. Sometimes you do see just with one, but there has to be significant depth of the property to allow you to wrap back around the front of the building as well.
It'd be out in the street otherwise.
So there may be some limitations on that based on the configuration of the property itself, the heritage trees presence out front. You know, that would have to be developed at a permitting stage down the road to see if it's even feasible. But to ask us to limit ourselves at this point, we would prefer not to.
Well, we get a lot of unreasonable requests from neighbors, but in a tight historic district, I think a drive-through has been touchy in this area on all developments, and knowing a little bit more about how it would be proposed, you know, you can see where we're coming from on that. I mean, I don't have any other questions unless the applicant wanted to talk.
Yeah, I mean, if the applicant wants to speak directly to that particular issue, I don't want to speak.
'Cause I don't want it to hold it up if they really don't plan on doing that.
Right, right.
But if they are and they have an idea.
And it is very, not to get off track, but it's very confusing, the code itself, the way it's written on what LB2 allows. I know that's been brought up, and what B2. I couldn't decipher the code, I'll be honest with you. It's very, very difficult. I have spoken with Margaret about it, and she's given me a list of things. It's still some gray area there, honestly. I don't see, there's not a major difference in the LB2 and what we're doing now, I don't believe.
With your elimination, you're
With the
very close
elimination,
to LB2.
But it's hard for me to read in LB2. It's even hard for me to see in B2 is a drive-through allowed, to be honest with you. It's not very clear. If that's the main issue.
Do you anticipate that there would be more than one building on this lot?
Well, if it
at
would, it would
another
be a
time?
PUD, so it'd have to
Right.
come back for you all to review, no matter
Right.
what.
Right?
So you would have the ability to address any concerns there at that time. So
'Cause right now
I would
you
say
just-
no. I don't foresee that being the case. I don't think there's enough room to do that. It's a pretty good bit of frontage, but
You're
don't
basically,
believe that
according
would be
to
the
this
case.
drawing, putting in a parking lot in what is today R1. So
no, that's
the-
currently B1.
B1.
Is this
It's
zoning
blue.
from R1, B1, and B2 to B2? Oh, I see, I read the whole thing wrong, never mind. Okay.
But we shouldn't be confused on the permitted uses and the different categories. Can staff clear that up between?
You have to go to Muni Code, and Muni Code is the standardized coding system for most municipal governments in the United States. And viewing the chart on that code, because you have your uses on one axis and the zoning categories on the other, it is difficult to read, and it's not something it's not easily exported.
Mr. Chair, so is the drive-through permitted in B2 or not?
Yes, it is permitted in B2.
Okay, I
And
thought
in
so.
LB.
And in LB2. The other thing is, and Mr. Orrell touched on this is not a PUD or a planning approval, so it is not site plan specific.
Makes it harder.
I'm Hunt Griffith. Thanks for having us again. I'm speaking really quick on behalf of my dad. Doug, what was it?
Check cashing agents.
Yeah. Yes, sir, we can add that to the list as well. Like Ms. Brenda said, we did sit down with her, we reached out, we enjoyed it. We're all on the same team, and I think we are even today and moving forward. We talked a lot in the first meeting. It served as about meeting halfway and doing this together. And everything that you heard as far as restrictions, you know, I didn't know what half of that stuff was, so it's not like we just made that up. This is all new to me and my dad, but that was what they had requested. I think we've done more than meet halfway, and moving forward, we still want to help and work with them and enhance the neighborhood, like I said last time, for the next 60 years, like we have fortunately the last 60. So that's really all I got. We want to make this work. and hope that we can continue to work with Ms. Brenda and the Government Street Collaborative and with y'all. So thanks for having us.
Mr. Griffith, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you say you would agree to those additional 2 things she added, or
Well,
just the things on your list?
I'm deferring to my counsel
your
here.
submitted list.
Well, we can add the check cashing.
The check cashing agency business was mentioned by, I think, Ms. Bolton.
Right.
Or Ms. Rich or somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
And I saw
The
the Griffiths
pond was
up there, so I
already
went up and asked them, I said, would y'all be willing to add that? And they said yes, so.
Perfect. I
that's
was
how
just
that
trying
came
to
about.
clarify
And the
what,
teen club and all the other things, that was what they had requested, detailed out in the first meeting. And they said, look, we just meet us halfway. We had to come together and meet halfway, and there's a give and there's a take. And I think we basically put everything down originally. And there's new things today, and I just feel like if we keep going, it's going to be another thing the next time. And just hopefully we can work this out and move forward. So thank you all.
But the drive-through, we would like to retain that option.
Yes, and there's no plan for that, but I think what I've heard is that, you just don't want to restrict yourself. If we do that, I mean, Ms. Brenda, you'll be the first one to know, I promise, but I don't think that's going to happen. Taylor, you might have some ideas we can do. But we're just trying to get, when you look at the aerial view, the gas station, which I don't know if it can be on LB2 or if it has to be BB2, but it's on about 1/5 of the property, and it's paying for all the property. And then you realize that about 20% of it's not all the same zoning, so we thought in December, hey, let's get this thing cleaned up and get it all the same zoning and see what we can do moving forward, whether it's actually putting a nice car wash or whatever it is.
That would be.
And now it's July, and I had no idea. This is a whole new world. I respect all y'all's efforts here, but just trying to get things in order, if you will. So.
Yeah, I agree. This is our 4th meeting, I think, 4th or 5th meeting.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, we've gotten everything worked out. You've come to the agreement with the voluntary restriction use. So, you have that form. If there's a couple more things that y'all are willing to put on there that they're asking for, great. But I think we've pushed it as far as we can.
Yes, sir. We're trying to work with everybody and just hopefully can move forward if possible.
Ms. Pappas, I do have one additional question. Since all of the property is being combined into one lot, whenever they propose to put more than one building on it, for example, if we got down the line and you did want to put a drive-through on there, it would have to come back before us as a PUD, would it not?
Not the drive-through by itself, like a facade.
It could be an administrative PUD because no other public hearing approvals would be required.
But it would still nonetheless have to come back before the city for approval.
It would come back before the city administratively, but it would not have to come back to the commission because rezoning and subdivision would not be needed.
Thank you.
There's no more checks to be written, like I said last time, so we won't be building anything. But if anybody's got any ideas, hey, we're here. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions by commissioners? Thank you. New subdivision applications, item number 4, 934 Conti Street, May Conti subdivision, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Is the applicant present? Is there anyone here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 5, 3060 Moffett Road, Dutch Master Subdivision, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Yes, sir. Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 6, 5651 Three Notch Road, Olivia Grace Place Subdivision, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present?
Tim Spafford, 1263 Lake Circle West. I'm here representing the owner, Dr. Sean Small. It's recommended for approval, but the two of the recommendations he does not want to accept, and that is the 50-foot from the center line of 3 Notch Road for the right-of-way, and then the 25-foot setback beyond that. One of the main reasons he's building a new building on this property is years ago they widened 3 Notch Road and cut down the parking in front of his building. And he's going to build a new building on the rear portion of the lot and then demo this existing building so he can have proper parking. And I don't know, there's an 80-foot right-of-way on 3 Notch Road. It is a 5-lane, 2 lanes each way and a turning lane. I don't know if there's any plan to widen it further, but I see no reason for the additional right-of-way, and the owner would like the first 2 provisions on the staff recommendations to be taken out.
Is the building that's proposed closer than 25 feet? It looks like it
The
already has it.
building proposed is towards the back, but if we give up 10 feet of additional right-of-way, we lose our landscape area and we lose some parking spaces. And I mean, this came up during the project review, submitting the plans for permit. He's not making any changes to the size of the lot or the zoning or anything. He's got an old dentist's office with terrible parking arrangement in the front, which is really a traffic hazard if you've ever been out there and tried to get in and out of this place when somebody else is doing the same. So he's building a new building, and yet we're asking him, with no compensation, we want more of your property when we took some of it previously.
I guess I'm a little confused. 50, question for traffic. 50 feet from the center line of 3 Notch puts us where on the property? I mean, it seems like all that would still work. The building is still 25 feet. It's not within the 25
It wouldn't
foot
affect
setback.
the new building, it would affect the new parking layout. And is there any plan to widen 3 Notch Road? I mean, maybe in 100 years.
As far as I know, there's not a plan to widen 3 Notch Road. I believe the dedication has everything to do with meeting the street standards for that roadway, how it's classified. The setback, it's not so much the setback that affects the development, it's the dedication of the 10 feet, which I would assume that 10 feet of the property is being shown with parking in it. The parking itself can be within the setback. It's probably parking within that 10 feet of dedication that he's concerned about.
With the compromise, and we've done this in the past, just have a 50-foot setback. Would that meet the requirement of what we're trying to accomplish?
Well, they're asking for a 75-foot from the center line of the road, but
That's not
there's,
the way
I mean,
read
the
it.
new building is going to be at the back of the lot, so and we're going to have to build this building, and then in 80 years, when it's time to demolish it, then that would be an issue. But the only issue is parking. We don't want to have to change our parking and landscape counts and all that for an additional 10 feet or so of property.
I don't think
right
that's what's
away.
being required. I mean,
Okay. 3 Notch Road, as Ms. Bergen said, is on the major street plan. The major street plan, as it does in most areas, stipulates 100 feet of right-of-way. There is existing in front of this property only 80 feet. So as is typical with Planning Commission action, the dedication of sufficient right-of-way to provide 50 feet from center line has been recommended by staff. So that is 10 feet that would be dedicated to the city for this right-of-way. One lot adjacent to the west has already dedicated that 10 feet of right-of-way. Then, once the right-of-way is dedicated, the building setback line would be 25 feet from that point. And that is required both via the subdivision regulations and the zoning ordinance. Your setback is always measured from your future major street line.
But does that impact parking lots?
No, sir,
Okay.
the setback does not. The dedication would.
Why don't we compromise and say a 35-foot setback and no additional right-of-way? So future buildings wouldn't be any closer than the adjacent property. And then I don't know how much of, I'm not sure where the city limits on Three Notch stop and the county begins, but it's not too far down Three Notch Road, so. And then a major road, I don't see them widening Three Notch Road anytime in the future, so really, we just don't want to give up the property without an anticipated need somewhere in the near-term future. A 35-foot setback should achieve the same thing and not require him to give additional right-of-way.
That seems reasonable, but I have to ask, it's a 200-foot lot. We're talking 10 feet. Is it, you act like it was going to ruin
The
whole
site
design?
plan has been maxed out to provide the most parking we can for his business. He is a sole practitioner, but he wants to bring on a partner. And I went through about 10 different site plan layouts, trying to save some of the trees on the lot, but we'll plant new trees. The parking is critical to his business. And like I said, he's building a new building partly because frontage was taken from this property before, and the parking is non-standard, non-conforming. The project he's putting money into is going to provide a much better use of this property and access to Three Notch Road, and much safer. And then we're asking him to give up additional property. He didn't want to do it. And I don't blame him. I mean, taking something and getting nothing for it is not the American way.
I'm with you.
And as far as the 100-foot right-of-way, I worked on another project where there was a 100-foot right-of-way on Halls Mill Road, and the city still asked for additional 10 feet on that property, which I didn't understand, but the owner didn't have a problem with it at the time. But it seems like, you know, in this case, it makes a difference to parking, not building. We could live with a 35-foot setback because the building is all the way to the rear of the property anyway. The new building will be. What did I win?
You want another minute.
Unless there are other questions, I appreciate y'all listening to my comments.
Thank you.
Any questions by commissioners? Anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you, sir. Next, item number 7, 4063 Lighton Court, Lighton Place subdivision, recommended for tentative approvals, applicant present. Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Applicant is present and in agreement. Is anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Next, item number 8, 3805 Spring Hill Avenue, Pineview Heights subdivision. Ms. Latham is recused. It's recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against?
couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yes,
A
ma'am.
couple of things I don't understand. Does anyone have the date that this was rezoned? It's just curious.
Could you give us your name for the record?
Geneva Gales,
And your address, please? Your name and address. for the record.
925 Knowles Lane.
Thank you.
Also, I am, my homestead is 3808 Spring Hill Avenue, which is directly across the street from this property. No one has it, that's okay. I know it was a long time ago, I've been there all my life.
Couple decades.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I was just curious. And the second question is, I'm concerned about where this driveway is going to come out. Now, we've been down here before about driveways coming out into neighborhoods, and I want to cut this off at the head here. I don't understand 1 through 4. I know you just explained this to somebody, but I was reading, I'm sorry, and I just caught the end of it, I think. But I don't understand about the 50 feet from the center line of Spring Hill Avenue for the right-of-way. Now, when we were down here about the blue building, we talked about some code or something, bylaw or something, where you couldn't open a driveway into a neighborhood. This property opens right into my homestead's front door. So where is this driveway going to come out? Is it going to come out on Spring Hill Avenue, or is it going to come out on McGregor?
Mr. Chairman, it's a subdivision application, which right now, all they're doing is combining what is currently multiple individual lots into one lot. They are not at the point that they have developed a site plan which would show the location of buildings and driveways and things of that nature. However, the commission has the authority, as part of granting them approval to create this one lot, to limit the number of curb cuts or driveways that they have. Traffic engineering has recommended that the site be limited to one driveway to McGregor and one driveway to Spring Hill Avenue. And then when the actual plan for development comes in, they would look and approve the actual location and the width of that driveway.
Okay, are we going to have something to say about this, or are they going to approve it? And, you know, last time they had their little meeting and said, anybody have anything to say? It's been approved. I mean, I want to get, I'm sorry, I'm just not familiar with the process.
I
is
understand,
what I'm
no
saying.
ma'am.
So,
This is right now the only public hearing that's required, because all they're doing is creating one lot. The zoning is in place for B2, so if they propose to put anything on the site, as long as that use is allowed in B2, everything at that point would be administrative, reviewed for building code compliance, compliance with setbacks, parking being provided.
Okay. I'm not meaning to cut you short. I'm concerned about the driveways. I'm concerned if I'm going to have something to say before they meet and say, okay, we approve this to be done.
At this
I
point,
am also, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. At any rate, I want to know, this is what I wanted to ask. Do we know what's going on the lot?
okay.
No, ma'am.
No. Okay. So there's another meeting that I need to attend, right?
No, ma'am, there
Only
would,
multiple buildings.
The only, if, like she said, this is zone B2. If they come in with a B2 use, a bank, a convenience store. If what they want to do with this property fits within B2, then the city departments can approve it without any further public hearing, and you will not have an opportunity to come down here and be heard. But the traffic engineer will look at where the curb cuts go and approve it. So the approvals will be internal with the city departments. There'll be no more public hearing. Only reason there'll be another public hearing is if they wanted to put multiple buildings on this one lot, or they wanted to do a use that was a B3, or a use that was not allowed in B2. So it is, all they're doing is combining these 8 lots, which is my recollection, having done some legal work on one of these years ago, is owned by about 5 different families, and they're just combining it into one lot. That's all they're doing.
Okay.
They've been trying to get a developer there for 20 years, and
Yeah, it's been a long
it might be another
time.
20 before they get one. Who knows?
Yeah, but, you know, the last time I was down here, we went up and down about these, you know, businesses opening up into neighborhoods as far as driveways were concerned and that kind of thing. And it seems that it gets thrown out for some people. So, you know, I'm just saying. And my cousin lives right across the street, and she didn't get the certified letter. So that's another thing. So thank you. I appreciate your help.
Thank you, man.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak against this? Does the owner wish to make any comments? Thank you. Item number 9, Pinehurst Subdivision, Delaney Addition, 1004 Wildwood Avenue, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 10, Southport Industrial Estate Subdivision, 4077 Hamilton Boulevard, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present?
Hi, Zeke Hudson with Rowe Engineering. I just had one question on the comments on page 3. Right now, there is a existing driveway between proposed lots 1 and 2. It's noted that that would be a shared drive, or that would not be allowed. Is there any leeway on that if we're trying to limit the number of curb cuts that will have to be used for the property? We know that sometime we'll want to add one for the access to Lot 3. Right now, there is an existing cut on Lot 1, and again, basically on the dividing line between Lots 1 and 2. Is there a way that we could have an easement or something that would show that both Lots 1 and 2 could use that as a shared access? Or do we have to go through the PUD process?
If you share, you're going to need, probably you'll end up needing a PUD.
Okay. But if we approve now, would that be an administrative after the fact on the subdivision?
Correct.
Okay. That's my only comments. Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. Item number 11, Dalewood Place Subdivision, south side of Grant Street, recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendations? Yes. Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this?
Good afternoon. Joel Daves, 21 Drury Lane, Mobile, Alabama, 36608. I'm the city councilman who represents the district in which this piece of property is located. I'm here today to do two things. One, to state my strong support for this application, and then to address some concerns that Mrs. Rich addressed to me and to the applicant. And in order to do that, I need to start at the beginning. It's a kind of a convoluted tale, and I'll try to keep it as short as possible. This piece of property was owned, was owned by the city of Mobile, and my understanding is that it was acquired at some point in the past in order to extend Florida Street from Airport Boulevard down to Highway 90. That project was abandoned at some point in the future, and the property was surplus. John Ballas saw the property, was interested in developing it, I think finally into garden homes. And just after Mardi Gras on Ash Wednesday, the sale to Mr. Ballas appeared on the City Council agenda. At that time, a significant outcry, opposition developed against the sale. To the east, the 6 owners in Delwood subdivision back up to this property, and then to the west, the folks that live on Duran Drive face it. So as I say, there was some opposition and maybe some misunderstandings with respect to both the Delwood folks and the Duran people. The Delwood folks formed a group and offered to buy the property. The property had been appraised, MAI appraisal, fair market value, and Mr. Ballas had offered to buy the property, and the Delwood people came along and offered to buy the property. My position was that the purchase by the Delwood group offered the best opportunity for the property to maintain the neighborhood as it was and not introduce any more density into the neighborhood. On April 2nd, the council met and voted 6-1 to approve the sale of the property to the Delwood group. Now, Ms. Rich, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she feels that there may have been some agreement, explicit or implicit, along with the sale to the Delwood group, that the property would be maintained as green space in perpetuity. That was not my recollection. And so I went back and listened or saw the video of the April 2nd City Council meeting. And at around, first of all, let me introduce Mr. Carl Deacle and Mr. T. Bruce McKinnon, who represent the applicant today, both of whom spoke at the City Council meeting. And at around the 45-minute mark, Mr. Deacle says that the Duran Drive residents had requested that the Delwood, the purchasing group, enter into some agreement in writing saying what they were going to do with the property, and the Delwood group had refused to do that. At about minute 50, Mr. McKinnon said that the plan was to have the property surveyed, that their plan, what they intended to do, was to have the property surveyed, subdivided into individual lots, and then to match those lots up with the property lines of the Delwood residents that backed up to it, and then have each person buy the lot that matched up with them. There was some discussion at the end about the cul-de-sac at the end and the Delwood group providing sufficient land and providing some additional right-of-way, which is in the conditions of approval and to which they agree. So there's really no evidence that there was any agreement, implicit or explicit, to maintain it as green space indefinitely. And I would suggest to you that the time and place to have resolved that issue was when it was sold, and that what is before the Planning Commission today is a request by owners of property that do not have any such restrictions in the deed to have it subdivided, and they should be treated like any other owner of property would be treated. Thank you very much. right on time.
Can I ask a question, if that's okay? I thought it was 7-0. I mean, I didn't realize, was there?
CJ voted against it.
Okay, I just want to make that clear, because I don't want anyone to think that was me at the time, because I was all for it. There is a letter that every council member received. I've given it to the staff, and I also spoke with Ms. Cochran, the city council's attorney, and it was implied, and also in a written document that we received, that said that the purchasers did not want to see development, and that was exactly why they were buying it, to not develop the property. So the idea that they had to subdivide it was clear, because there were multiple people buying this piece of property. The LLC, I'm assuming, is strictly the people that abut, and that the idea was to keep it green, and they would maintain it better than the city. They even repeated that numerous times at the meeting. Now, there were residents from Durant that said they weren't sure, but it was clear to this council, and I've spoken to 2 council members who also would appreciate this slowing down right now, so that there could be some more dialogue and a greater understanding of what is being proposed. I spoke to Mr. Deacle. You asked me to speak to him, and I was happy to do that as the commissioner. And the idea that their curb cuts allows development if it just ends at this point. And again, there is a letter that clearly said, and if we could get that to everybody for their review, I would appreciate it, whether we wait until we go into deliberation. But it said, is very, very clear.
I'm going to let Mr. McKinnon, since it's Mr. McKinnon's
Yeah, it was
letter.
absolutely.
Since it's Mr. McKinnon's letter, I'll let him respond to that.
I appreciate that. I do appreciate it.
Mr. Dave, just for us, I mean, we, coming new to this, and just so we'll understand who we're talking about, the applicant, the members of this Delwood LLC, whatever it's called, is that made up of the people who live adjoining this property?
Yes.
That's what's
It's the 6 houses that back up to it, just to the east there.
So they're the ones that have come in and purchased the property.
Yes, and they purchased it as a group in a LLC, wasn't it? And so now they're at the point where they want to divide it up, and so the lots that are proposed before the Planning Commission, those east-west property lines line up with the property lines of the abutting Delwood owners.
So I guess the idea there is, again, make this new property part of their existing homesteads.
That's what I thought.
Well, I think that they don't have and didn't have any plan to do anything other than that. But what they don't, and again, I don't want to speak for them, but what they're not willing to say and didn't ever agree to was to never do anything with it.
But the last sentence, and the author can come down, said to the council that this LLC be allowed to purchase this property to eliminate any development.
And I believe, again, I'm going to let Mr. McKinnon speak for himself, but I believe, I'm going to let him speak for himself. That's better. It's his letter.
I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
I mean, again, just for clarification, I mean, this is at a higher level than what we are, but we're trying to decide whether or not to approve a subdivision. And, I mean, staff it meets the requirements for the subdivision. So, I mean, what grounds would we have to be against the subdivision?
Other than the intent of what was publicly announced, and also the fact that there was another applicant that had come down and actually been very transparent about, prior to buying the property, it would require a subdivision, it would require possible PUD and possibly a rezoning. So that was very transparent, but that was not, the community didn't feel it was in their best interest. The council person also...
And that's the development Mr. McKinnon was saying they weren't going to do.
No, they are asking to purchase this property, to eliminate any development. They didn't say the SAD the Vallis development. I mean, that's who it was. So it said any.
I have
That's
a
wide
question.
open.
Mr. Chairman,
I have a question of clarity. What's before us is simply re-subdividing the lot at the moment.
right.
Now, the future intent, is it just for them to buy it and add it to their lots and be done with it? So that these would be sold off to the homeowners that abut it, and then they, since it's their lot at that point, they can do what they want? Or is it gonna remain?
I want them to answer. Do you mind if I let them
Sure,
answer?
sure.
Yeah, that's the way the council understood it, at least the two that I was able to reach prior to the meeting.
But as the application currently is, it will be 6 individual lots.
Correct. What you have before you now would create 6 legal lots of record if approved. Once the conditions have been complied with and the plat recorded, they could come in with 1 home on each lot.
And if they wanted to add them to their lot, they would each have to do a 1-lot subdivision?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm T. Bruce McKinnon. I live at 352 West Delwood Drive, Mobile, Alabama, 36606. I have no prepared statement, and I'll be happy to clarify anything we talked about at the council meeting.
Because the underlying question is, what's the intent? Should you be granted the subdivision, are you going to maintain 6 distinct lots, or are you going to add them to the homeowner's lot that they immediately abut?
We took the advice from Brad Christensen to proceed with subdivision, subdividing the lots. To clarify, the LLC is mine and my wife's LLC. It's not an LLC that was developed separate just for this. We're not developers. This was not in the budget for any of the neighbors. Yes, we bought the property to stop any development, but we own the property now, and we should have some right to it. There was never a discussion about we're going to extend our brick walls and have bigger yards. I guess if we're forced to do that, then okay, but that's not what we were indicating. Some of the things I believe that might have been appeared or insinuated in regards to green space and parks and things like that, I have a history of those things. There is absolutely no intention whatsoever by the 6 neighbors to do anything with this property. None, except cut it. That could change sometime down the road, obviously, but our goal was to simply not have a development behind our homes.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Just for clarification again, the Delwood LLC, it's made up all of the adjoining property owners of this?
No, it's not.
It's not?
The LLC is made up of my wife and I.
Okay.
So at the moment, we own all the property.
Okay.
So it has to be, something has to be done to be able to get it, in everybody else's name. So that hasn't been done. We bought it in that single entity simply for the purpose of making it simple on the purchase. So I don't know if that has anything to do with this.
So you would have to sell it to other neighbors
Right.
if you so chose to.
So you don't have the involvement of all the other neighbors? on
Yes, we
Delwood?
do.
You do?
We do. We have a signed agreement with all of the other neighbors of these lots being subdivided, becoming their lots directly behind their property. That's the agreement that we all agreed to.
But you're the only one, you and your wife are the only ones legally obligated to the property, as far as ownership is concerned.
Officially, yes.
Officially, but it was expressed to council that each person who abutted was going to be the owner of that particular lot.
Yes.
Okay, that's very clear. And with green space talked about, and no, we didn't talk about necessarily bumping out your brick walls, but we did talk about the fact that it was abutting property. So, of course, in order to get that under somebody's wing for future sale of their property, you would incorporate it within the Delwood, neighborhood and make it those lots. So the idea that you're coming in now for curb cuts and, access is just counter to what was publicly stated. And the idea that there would be, and eliminate any development.
Question for staff, are there curb cuts and things that are part of the re-subdivision just mandatory rules that come about? Or is it, since they're subdivided, do they by default get a curb cut?
Correct. Each lot typically, legally, is allowed a curb cut.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, item number 6 and item number 9 in your condition list somewhat conflict each other. Not knowing the intent, but realistically looking at the lot lines, hoping that the intent was to connect it to the other property, I left my comment open-ended and did not specifically say one curb cut per. So that might need clarification to choose one or the other.
Thank you.
I'm going to recommend when we get into deliberation, just so everybody hears this, that this be held up for these types of clarification. There's no pending development going on. We're not holding something up economically. The lot has already, the acreage has already moved from the city's property over to this LLC or TBM Investments LLC. And again, I'll recommend that we hold this up and
It's not the proper time for that.
I know, but I just want to make sure in case applicant left or whatever, so. That's very important to the council.
And what would the justification be for holding it over?
Yeah, we can
Okay,
do that.
okay.
Thank you, sir.
My counsel told me to.
Is there anyone else here to speak for or against this?
Wanted it.
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Deacle, and we actually have an association in Delwood. So I'm the president of the association, T. Bruce is secretary. And so a lot of the stuff that's happened with this transaction I kind of handled with T and the other 5 neighbors. A couple of clarification issues on the question that you guys asked about the one LLC purchasing the property. That wasn't something we decided to do. The city asked us to have one purchaser make the transaction easy as opposed to each person coming and purchase. So T actually volunteered his LLC to purchase the property. That's how that happened. Second item y'all mentioned, you talked about a neighborhood agreement. Was there agreement amongst neighbors? There is an agreement amongst neighbors, and it's really clear, trying to protect the neighborhood and trying to protect the Durante Drive residents as well. And it pretty much states that, every individual neighbor purchased that property, the exact square footage that they did. But in the event that they sell their home, the first thing they have to do is they have to offer that piece of property to the person who bought their home so they could actually own that property and keep it, the privacy as well. If that person who bought their home doesn't buy it, then they have to offer it to the 5 other members in the Delwood group that they can actually buy it. So we're doing everything we can to protect this property. And, I think we provided that document back during the city council time. And I do, unfortunately, I have a little bit of a prepared statement, but the 3.5 acre tract of land that's already zoned R1, if we wouldn't have purchased it, there's going to be 12 to 15 homes that were going to be built on that property. As a matter of fact, we were told that there was a proposal to actually rezone the property to R2. That's what really got us hopping, that all of a sudden somebody could come and rezone property that was touching our property as R2, and then we'd have some type of multifamily units that are coming right across our back wall, looking into our neighborhood with our kids, sunbathing or whatever. And so to get 5 or 6 neighbors together and get them to agree to purchase a piece of property that they never really wanted in the first place was difficult in and of itself. But then after the purchase is done, to go out there and say, hey, you know what, we purchased it, each one of you own your respective lots, now we're going to stick some restrictions on it, you can't ever do anything with it. And, that was never the intent. And we were very clear, we told the city, we said, you know what, we want it to be green space. That has not changed. There's not one person in our neighborhood that wants to develop that piece of property. And we told the Durante Drive residents, we met with those guys on the lot over there, and we said, hey, you know what? We have no intention of developing it. We're going to try and do a better job of keeping it up than the city did. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of Durante Drive residents back there today. And they've called us and they said, you know what, y'all are doing a great job of keeping that property up. It looks so much better than it ever did. And so we're trying to honor our word, but to come back and tell people who bought a piece of property, oh, guess what, you can never cut curbs in it or something, we don't know what's going to happen 20 years down the road or 30 or 40 years down the road. And so, you know, all we're asking is to be fair. We had Paul Stewart, our surveyor. We met with several of the city people, Brad Christensen, Nick Amberger. Every single thing that they recommended, we said yes. If they want a right-of-way extended, if they want a cul-de-sac put in, whatever they have said, we said, yes, we'll do it. We have not presented any objection. So all we're doing is asking that you guys review it, grant us the approval to subdivide the property so we can move on with our lives and let these individuals own their pieces of property. And we will keep a green space, you know, for the foreseeable future. I really have no objection with that whatsoever. Thank you all. Any questions?
Thank you, sir. Anyone else here to speak for or against this? Thank you. We'll move to new rezoning applications. Item number 12, 3901 Cottage Hill Road, Spring Hill Insurance Company. Recommended for approval. Is the applicant present? Are you in agreement with staff recommendation? Applicant is present and in agreement. Is there anyone else here to speak for this? Is there anyone here to speak against? Thank you. New group applications, item number 13. Spring Hill Avenue, 1624 Spring Hill Avenue, Magnolia Manor. It's recommended for holdover until September 5th.
David Schumer, Barton Schumer Engineering, acting as the applicant in reference. We're not against the holdover. We're fine with that. We had some new information brought to our attention last Thursday regarding a variance that we were initially told was null and void because the house was redeveloped as a residence that we could actually use. But for future ease, we're still wanting to rezone for B2 with restrictions. There's no intent to use it other than a reception area. It's a historic home on a property. We're trying to consolidate it, the two lots as one, just to clean that up. And then the PUD, because there's an existing carriage house that'll be used as part of the reception space. But we're going to talk with the staff and put the restrictions for the uses to appease any neighborhood concerns that there might be, because, I mean, it's a historic home and it's going to be used as a reception. So,
okay.
If you have any questions or...
This item is recommended for holdover, which will probably be granted at that time. Applicants and people in the public are allowed to speak for or against this, but you do have that right to speak now if you so choose. So is there anyone else here to speak for this or against it? Does the commission have any questions? Thank you, sir. Item number 14, Summers Commercial Park Subdivision, 5221 Cottage Hill Road. Both parts recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present? Is the applicant present? Is there anyone here to speak for this? Anyone here to speak against? Thank you. That concludes our public session. We'll now enter into deliberation. Item number 1, from holdovers for zoning, Philip Curtin, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 2, 2407 Old Shell Road. The PUD was withdrawn, so We're only acting on the zoning, which was recommended for approval. Is there a motion?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor of approval of the zoning, rezone?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 3, north side of Government Street, Griffith subdivision, both parts recommended for approval. We'll take them as one. Is there a motion?
Move to approve based on staff recommendations, including the notarized copy of the voluntary use restriction form.
Second that motion.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask, did you want the addition of the check cashing agency being added to that voluntary use restriction as offered by the applicant?
My thoughts were was that anything that was offered by the applicant, to put it on there.
And also under subdivision number 1, where it references the signed letter, we have a written statement document from the owner of Lot 3, W.T. McGowan property. We have verbal consent from them. But the letter, the written document that they sent was amended and sent back to that owner by the city legal department. It was returned today, or today, unsigned, saying we need to change this language. So for clarity's sake, instead of saying as drafted by the city, we need to say as approved by the City of Mobile Legal Department, because there's going to be some negotiations. They've agreed to it. We just need to get a proper document.
So we're just changing as drafted to as approved.
As approved by
Okay.
City Legal, yes.
Make that part of my motion.
Thank you.
Second motion.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. New subdivision applications. Item number 4, May Conti Division subdivision, recommended for approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. Item number 5, Dutch Master Subdivision, 3060 Moffett Road, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
I move we approve, subject to staff recommendations.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 6, Olivia Grace Place Subdivision, 5651 Three Notch Road. It's recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
Before we make a motion, I would like to sort of get staff to clarify once again, and maybe even traffic to clarify, what is the best way to structure item 1 and item 2? Do we leave them like they are? Do we modify them and adjust them to accommodate, to allow him to get his parking in the area that he wants to get his parking? What is the most reasonable solution?
We stand by the staff recommendation. You have another application, 2 applications down at Spring Hill and McGregor, where we're obtaining the additional right-of-way on a 4 and 5 lane improved street. The major street plan calls for 100 feet of right-of-way in this area in front of this application. It would necessitate the dedication of 10 feet, which has already occurred a couple of lots to the west around in this area. So staff recommends dedication and compliance, and then the setback from that dedication, which is required by the zoning ordinance and sub-regulations.
Mr. Chairman, So what is the practical ramification for the extra 10 feet being taken?
It allows for additional capacity for the street.
No,
or
I mean for the applicant. How does this change the usage of their parking lot right now?
It would, if he does any future improvements in the parking lot, he would end up needing a right-of-way use agreement, because at that point, it would be right-of-way.
Yeah, so it's not like, I mean, the conversation earlier was, this is like an un-American illegal taking, which, I get it, but it's not like the parking lot, 10 feet of the parking lot is going to be erased.
Correct. Now, when he renovates, he will have to address it at that time.
When he renovates, he will have to back up his parking lot.
There have been many situations like this where the city has approved a right-of-way use agreement allowing parking or landscaping within that dedicated part, so that they can still use it.
And then if the roadway was ever increased way in the future, they'd have the right, without having to purchase the land, to increase it. Seems reasonable.
Okay.
So is there a motion?
Well, before you go into that part, I need to step away from this. I didn't realize it, but when I heard the applicant's name, the dentist, his wife is a partner with my husband, so I would be better.
Recusing yourself.
Yeah, yes, that's the word. So I didn't realize it, because nobody said it.
Ms. Rich is recused.
Yes.
I would move to approve based on staff recommendation.
Motion to approve based on staff recommendations. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 7, Leeton Place subdivisions, re-subdivision of Lot 31, 4063 Leeton Court, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
I'll make
Second.
that motion, sorry.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 8, 3805 Spring Hill Avenue, Pineview Heights subdivision. Ms. Latham is recused. Recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
Move to approve based on staff recommendations.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 9, 1004 Wildwood Avenue, Pinehurst subdivision. Recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item passes. Item number 10, 4077 Hamilton Boulevard, Southport Industrial Estate subdivision, recommended for tentative approval. Is there a motion?
Question before the motion, please. Once again, for staff, item 1, there was a question, needs clarification about the shared access.
The PUD can be administrative.
Okay, so that can be handled at a later time, so leave number 1.
You could keep number 1. It just says PUD, approval of a PUD if they continued shared access.
Okay. So leave it as is. Move to approve based on staff recommendations.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. Item number 11, south side of Grant Street, Dalewood Place subdivision. Recommended for approval. Is there a motion?
I would like to offer a motion to hold over. I will personally be out of the city for our next meeting, which I think is August 1st. I would like to be present. That's certainly your prerogative, but I would like more time. I spoke to the city council's attorney about this matter, and she believes, and she wanted me to promote the fact that it needed to rest for more clarification, a greater understanding of what was publicly expressed, what was written to council on what was to be, achieved with this sale that took place. And so if we could have it at the second meeting in August, I would personally be grateful for that. But again, just some slowdown to this would be very, very important to the council members that I spoke to.
What did we need clarification on?
That there was public exposure, that there was an applicant that initially worked with the city to make a proposal and offer a sale after getting, having it appraised, and then there was objections to it by people who live nearby. So the owners in Delwood came forward and represented they didn't want any development, that they would purchase it. I clearly understood it was green space, and I knew perhaps it would need to be subdivided, but I was very surprised to see the curb cuts recommended for approval, especially the one on Grant. And so, again, that was something that the council and what the public heard, so intent and information given to council and public exposure, knowing that we had already had an application that came before us from another entity that told exactly what they needed to do, and that got the neighbors involved. But again, the idea was no development of any kind or any development. So
Yeah, that sounds like they expressed kind of that.
it was very expressed. And
But
when you get driveways,
can we even prohibit someone from having access to a street that their lot fronts? I mean, if they don't have...
Wasn't supposed to front
So
it.
if we looked into the future, this is really a question for Doug, since he's our attorney. If we look into the future and someone owns one of these lots and there's some kind of prohibition on them having a curb cut, they wouldn't have access to the street that they're paying us to maintain for them. Can we even not give them a curb cut?
We can legally deny access or limit the number of curb cuts. There are so many questions that have come up in this application, and I have friends on all sides of it, and I'm not taking any sides on this. When Ms. Rich first suggested holdover, I thought, that might be a good idea, because I think it might be good for y'all to have a copy of that agreement between the neighbors. And then, I think the gentleman's name was Mr. Deagle, came up, who is one of the owners, who's not a member of the LLC, and to me, confirmed the existence of that agreement. I don't know if we hold it over, what Ms. Cochran what can be done. Like Mr. Dave said, if there are no deed restrictions, if the city did not put any deed restrictions in the deed to this LLC, then I'm not sure we can legally stop the subdivision. So if we hold it over, the only thing I can see gaining is for y'all to have a copy of the deed to see if there are any restrictions on development.
We don't look at restrictions, though.
Right.
Pardon?
We don't look at restrictions.
This is
That's
just
not part of our criteria.
It's just about subdividing.
Being an agency of the city, if the city council approved the sale based on these representations and put the restrictions that these lots could not be built on then that would be considered. So,
Yeah, it's a different subject that I don't remember in 7 or 8 years of doing this that we've ever dealt with a city-owned piece of property being
Absolutely.
sold. So it's a different,
Absolutely. Yeah.
would the city council be taking this back up again at some point in time if we hold it over? Is that sort of the idea?
I don't know the
Okay.
possibility of that, but
Okay.
again, what was publicly expressed, what was the intent, what was the understanding of each council member, and then what transpires after the fact, when indeed the idea was we as a council had a sale on the city council's agenda, and it was just totally removed and this one inserted. But it was my understanding they were doing this because they were going to absorb those lots. Those were the owners and part of the LLC. I didn't know the nuances that it's already existed in LLC because that was not made clear to me. I might have had some more questions. But the idea that each owner was to get the property, and the sense was they would maintain it and they would keep it in green and they would not develop it because the letters to our office said to stop any development. So that was the condition.
Well, really,
and that could still be accomplished by the subdivision, by
Right.
the LLC selling each lot. Like I know the Doctors McMurphys live in one of these lots on Delwood, and so they could buy the lot from the LLC behind them based on the subdivision. The only way, since the LLC owns this, the only way to get these properties to the individual owners in Delwood is to do a subdivision. That's the only way.
But
And then each individual owner would come in and do a subdivision,
of their property.
bringing that property
That's what
into their
Okay.
existing property.
Can as it stands now, can the city reverse the sale, or is the sale finalized? And B, can the LLC, if we don't grant them the re-subdivision, can they basically do what they want to do anyway? Can they go develop it now, even without us?
Absolutely. The LLC could do I don't know what was represented at the city council. They could come in and they could come in and develop this and build 6 houses. Absolutely. Based on this subdivision. But also, like I said, the only way to get these lots into the Delwood ownership is to do this.
Subdivide them.
The city staff just happened to put in these conditions of curb cuts because that's what they do in a subdivision.
Right.
I mean, they have to do that.
Should the applicant, knowing what was expressed to council, explain to the staff that they were just expanding their backyards and that the subdivision should just be to expand each one of their lots to meet what they purchased?
Could they have done that? Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Changing subject a little bit, who is opposed to the development?
I'm not-
Who was,
I'm
the
for this, I'm for this subdivision.
the
Who's
Delwood
opposed?
Association.
But
what
Initially,
development?
The first
this one.
application.
Oh, this
yeah,
one?
this application, who is opposed? Because no one spoke against it except for Ms. Rich. So, I mean, who's opposed to it?
Who knows about it?
Right.
Well, we do, and I think it's a great thing that the neighborhood did. They've purposely bought these lots and subdividing them into 139 by 89 as the smallest lot, where they perfectly line up with their individual backyards. I mean, what we're guarding ourselves against is the doomsday of 6 houses being built by 6 non-developers right now.
And
them
what
specking one house behind their backyard. I mean,
And what they
I think
said in
this is
writing-
a great solution.
The council had a proposal to develop that property, and it was rejected, and this was inserted that said to prevent or to eliminate any development.
But it's
So the
not
subdivision that you would be granting is not doing what was publicly and known by the council at the sale of that.
by
Is it our
subdividing it
purpose
is not
to be the
developing it.
council stick? I mean,
They're simply trying to
get it out
The
of one
council's
LLC.
attorney would appreciate if this was held up. I would like to see it at the second meeting in August. That's a personal thing, I'm being honest with you. I'd like to be present as somebody who is close to this.
But the city council's attorney, what she would like is not really material to the subdivision.
Yes, she felt that because of how the sale transacted and what was understood.
I mean, it passed us with a 6-to-1
We currently
vote.
have a motion to hold over. There is no second at the moment. Is anyone going to second the motion to hold over?
I have no problem seconding the motion for a holdover of 4 weeks, whatever it is. I mean, obviously, it looks to me like we're going to get, I mean, they're entitled to their subdivision. I don't see how we can prevent that. They bought the property.
Should have been their backyards.
But I will second the motion to hold it over until August, to give the city staff and the dust to settle, a little bit to figure out what's going on, and to make sure we're not getting ourselves into any trouble as a city.
Well, the city staff this city staff has done their job. It's up to if the council attorney and Ms. Rich think that they have been defrauded, then it's up to them to come to the next meeting, in my opinion, to say that the city was defrauded, but this staff has done their job.
So this staff is satisfied with the recommendation, for approval as is.
But is this even the appropriate venue for them to deal with that kind of conflict?
I'm sorry.
Is this even the appropriate venue for the city council to be dealing with that conflict? Because what she's saying...
It may or may not be, Matt. I guess to one pro in Mrs. Rich's motion would be that if there is evidence presented that shows the city's been defrauded or the council was defrauded in the negotiations when they voted to sell this property, then that could alleviate a lot of legal, you-know-what, in the future.
So saying if we went
I'm not
forward-
taking sides. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't approve it
I would hope
or
it
hold it
wouldn't get to
over.
that.
I'm just trying to answer your questions as best I
Yeah,
can.
and again, I think a 3 or 4 week holdover is reasonable. I mean, I think, when they come back in 3 or 4 weeks, they will get their approval for their subdivision. I think that's, it's going to happen. But if we can just make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves and the planning commission approves something that city council may have to go back and look at again. That may not even be possible. I don't know, but at
Like
least
you said, this is a first time event. I've never seen anything like this in my 30
So I
years
think
of
it's
being before
okay
the
and
PC,
wise
so.
to sort of take a little time to make sure we're getting this right.
All in favor for the holdover? Sign of hands. All opposed? 4-3, the holdover fails. Is there a new motion?
I move to approve the subdivision.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, show of hands. All opposed? 4-3, subdivisions approved. New rezoning applications. Item number 12, 3901 Cottage Hill, recommended for approval. Is there a motion?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor for the rezoning?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. New group applications, 1624 Spring Hill Avenue, Magnolia Manors, recommended for holdover to the September 5th meeting. I'll make the motion. Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of holdover till September 5th?
Aye.
Opposed? Item will be held over till September 5th meeting. Item 14, Summers Commercial Park Subdivision, 5221 Cottage Hill Road. Parts A and B are recommended for approval. We'll take it as one. Is there a motion?
Move to approve based on staff recommendations.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Item passes. That concludes the deliberation session of the business. The planning commission meeting and deadline schedule has been presented, so they have to formally be adopted. Is there a motion to adopt the meeting and deadline schedule for 2019-2020?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of adoption?
Aye.
Opposed? Due meeting and deadline schedule is passed and adopted for 2019-2020. Is there any other business? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.